In Kenneth Branagh's follow-up to Murder on the Orient Express, a story in which a famous detective has to solve the mystery of a murder on a train in which every passenger is a suspect, we have the sequel, Death on the Nile, a story in which a famous detective has to solve the mystery of a murder on a boat in which every passenger is a suspect. Way to step outside your comfort zone, Agatha Christie. Yeah, I don't know how these movies rate as adaptations, but just as a movie, this gives the impression that the filmmakers were like, well, we like how Murder on the Orient Express turned out, but we think we can do better. So let's take the same blueprint we used for that one, tweak a couple details, make some improvements here and there, and then just recycle the whole thing. And the result is a sequel that kind of feels like the same movie, but with a new coat of paint and a few more bells and whistles. But I quite like Murder on the Orient Express, so that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, and in some ways it isn't. I think Death on the Nile does benefit from some of the tweaks they made. It still feels like the same basic plot as the first film, but structurally it's been rejiggered a little bit to make various characters and plot points more compelling. And that should be a check in its favor, except that it doesn't really work 100% of the time. The murder happens a little bit later in the story this time, so for the first act you're just getting to know the characters and how they relate to each other to make you more invested in everyone, and catching up with Detective Poirot, whose name I'm sure I just butchered, who continues to be the best thing in these movies. In this one, Poirot has gotten to know quite a few of the main players before things start happening. He knows a few of them outside of his work, so that makes the murder feel more personal this time, which is then exacerbated because it hits home for him and forces him to come to terms with some parts of his backstory that he'd rather keep buried. When the movie is focused on that, when it feels personal for Poirot, there's some really good stuff here. Where it kind of falters is when they try to make it personal for the other characters. Now with some of them, like Book and his subplot, I was intrigued by what they were doing. But at the heart of the murder mystery, there's this love triangle. Happy newlyweds, jilted ex-fiancé, so you caring about the murder plot is kind of dependent on you caring about them, about the couple and their relationship, and the bride in particular. And I didn't really. They seem like a nice enough couple, but they're not very sympathetic. The more we learn about the bride, the less we like her. Apparently, she isn't as nice as she seems, and she has a lot of enemies because of this, and this. And the way the ex-fiancé got screwed over by the bride paints her and her new husband in a pretty ugly light, and neither of them seem to feel particularly bad about that either. Frankly, I felt more sympathy for the ex-fiancé, and I'm pretty sure I wasn't supposed to because she's shown to have bad intentions from very early on, but the actress was way more charismatic than the other two on top of everything else, so that was the character that sucked me in. Plus, the newlyweds got hitched so quickly after they met that their relationship and the reactions after the murder happens are all weirdly unconvincing. You have to be able to believe in this relationship and how much they love each other for parts of the story to hit you properly, but I just didn't buy it. And sure, that was partly by design because of things that happened later, spoilers for a book written in 1937, but that relationship was key to making everything else work. If it isn't convincing, you've got a problem. So when the murderer is revealed, it doesn't feel that surprising. My reaction was, yeah, okay, something always felt screwy about this person, so that makes sense. It also makes you wonder about a bunch of earlier plot points, because once you know what happened, things start to make less sense all of a sudden. You start asking why characters would do A, B, and C when you've got the world's greatest detective on the boat with you, and won't that just encourage him to pay closer attention to what's going on here, which is what you don't want? And it doesn't help that the murder plot itself is very convoluted. There's a lot of moving parts to it, and it relies pretty heavily on people being in certain places at certain times, and certain things that you think are clues are actually not clues. Now, Murder on the Orient Express was the same way, but it was able to make that work because ultimately all the suspects played some kind of important role in the murder, so there were a lot more things in the story that mattered. Here, again, you have a lot of suspects with supporting characters who seem important at times, but a lot of them just end up being red herrings. And yeah, they have secrets of their own, but most of those secrets don't really relate to the murder. So at the end of the film, you look back at everybody like, how important was this person person or that person in the grand scheme of things. Not very if you think about it. So was their screen time really time well spent? I don't know. Now, when those secrets tie back to Poirot and what makes this mystery personal for him, that's when it works, because he's the one we care about. And luckily for the film, that happens a good amount of the time. So when he's worked up, when he's invested, you are too. Even if the murder plot isn't drawing you in the way it should, you still care about it because he does. So weirdly enough, the actual death on the Nile in Death on the Nile is one of the weaker parts of this. The parts that save it are any of the elements that make it more personal for Poirot. I felt like I got to know the guy this time because of that stuff, which is something I didn't really get in Murder on the Orient Express. So we've got a little bit of a trade-off here, where the main character is serviced better and given more compelling development in the sequel, but the actual murder mystery you're selling the movie on was better in the first one. Death on the Nile is a bit flawed. It takes a little while for the story to get moving, and their attempts to spend more time getting you invested in the characters before the shit hits the fan doesn't really work with some of the people the story needs you to care about the most, but it does work with the main character. When he works, the story works, and as it happens, he works more often than not. I think I do prefer Murder on the Orient Express just because of the copy-paste nature of the premise in this one. It does feel sort of derivative in that way, but there's enough good stuff in here that I was engaged the whole time, and it's a well-made film, minus one or two poorly CG'd exterior shots that look like video game cutscenes, which didn't do it any favors. So, not perfect. Ultimately, I think Murder on the Orient Express is better, but I like this movie. I don't think you need to rush out and go see it right now, but we can and have done a hell of a lot worse this year, so I definitely think it's worth seeing. And it was refreshing to have a good old-fashioned detective story to relax with in between the huge blockbuster tentpoles like Spider-Man No Way Home and Uncharted. And shit, if the Batman works out the way I hope it does, maybe that can happen again soon. Thanks for watching, everybody. Let me know what you thought about Death on the Nile in the comments. While you're here, ding the bell icon and follow my social media so you can always be notified when I upload new stuff. Links to all that and to my live streaming channel are down below. And most importantly, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and make sure you're still subscribed, because what really deserves to be mysteriously killed and become the center of a murder plot surrounded on all sides by people with different reasons for wanting him dead is the YouTube algorithm. That's all for now, but I'll be back with more soon. So stay tuned for that, do all the YouTube things, and I'll see you next time.